Welcome to Gatorade, an OpinionRoute show to help market research professionals learn and grow. In this podcast, we share stories, insights, and philosophies that unlock enterprise value for the modern market research company. Here's our host, CEO and founder, Terrence McCarran.
Welcome back to Gatorade. This episode, I sat down with Rich Ratcliff. Rich here at OpinionRoute is our Chief Trust Officer. He covers everything privacy, compliancy, and really importantly, quality. His journey's been really personal in his lengthy career in market research as he's had to deal with the personal and professional impact of the data quality struggle. And that's really galvanized a new chapter of his career around identifying trends and rectifying some of the threats through OpinionRoute to the industry. So I'm excited for what he does here. I'm excited for you to get a little more of an inside view into that. We'll also talk about some perspective differences in the industry and how Rich really is dedicated to the improvement of the industry at large through volunteering through industry associations. Hope you enjoy the chat as much as I did. Rich, welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much. I've been looking forward to it.
All right, so you've been in the industry a lot longer than me, maybe not too much, I won't stress that, but tell me how you got in. How'd you get your start in the industry, and give us a little tour of your career so far in the space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I got in this industry back in the 90s when I knew I was going in for applications development. And what I realized very quickly was that I fell in love with the pace, fell in love with the idea of market research and really tech ops more than anything else. I knew that, and I think that that's what you find out during your early part of your career, I knew I was not going to be the best coder in the room. And from that point, I knew that I understood what they were talking about, but they were much better than I was in that process. But what I did realize is that market research was absolutely an industry that I wanted to understand more about. And every time I understood one thing, I wanted to understand more. And I ended up learning pretty much everything in operations from that point. From that, I sort of went towards, I knew that I could manage people in a way to bring the best of them out. And that turned into managing operations and then eventually running an agency where I saved the agency, I expanded it, and I eventually got it sold to a PE firm.
That's great. So for us, you've filled a few different roles as we've grown and evolved. You've been here quite a few years now. Beginning of this year, we took the leap, which I thought was really consistent with what we're all about in the industry, but you took on the mantle of Chief Trust Officer for us. And that was something we talked a lot about as being prevalent more outside of market research as opposed to being inside. I believe that this is going to be more of a table stakes type role in every insights organization moving forward. What do you think? Tell me what you think this kind of role, what place it has and what it means for the market research industry overall.
I thought quite a bit very early on about when you and I started talking about this Chief Trust Officer approach, what it meant for me, what it meant for the company, and then what it meant for the industry. What it meant for me was really synthesizing quite a bit into one person. And those things are technology, security, privacy, compliance, and all the ethics that you need to be involved in. But for the company, one of the things that we always talk about is how much trust we need our clients to give us. What I've realized is that there's sort of three different levels there, as you mentioned. One is myself, one is the company, and one is the industry. Myself, it really is taking everything I've learned so far and pulling it into one role. Everything from what you need to know about operations, because you need to know that so that you can understand the activities that are happening. You got to understand the technology, the security, the compliance, the privacy issues that are involved in all of this. When we get to OpinionRoute and what it means for OpinionRoute, you and I talked quite a bit, and it stayed on my mind quite a bit about how our leadership gives the message to the industry as to what we want to focus on. We want to focus on trust, the customer experience, growth, operations. Those are the things that if you look at our leadership, that's what is showing. I think for the industry, you're absolutely right. This is a table stakes moment for the industry. If you look at every other industry that deals with data, they have trust officers. If you look at the larger companies out there, SAP, Google, Meta, all of them have trust officers. And they put those trust officers in place because it's important that the people who use their platforms trust their platform. So it's the same idea. It's the same thing here. I can't understand myself why larger companies within this industry haven't already put a trust officer in place. They're working with data that has the impact of billions of dollars. And that alone tells me that you've got to have someone in the C-suite that says, hey, these are all the things that we need to think about, and it doesn't come from 2 or 3 people, or it doesn't come from someone outside of the C-suite.
And it's built into sort of the DNA of the company. I think our journey toward this kind of role and this focus in the business, I think we both agree that it started for us on a shared passion for data quality, right? I think you and I, long before we ever met, were on parallel paths to a place of feeling compelled to really do something to assure data quality in online survey research. I've shared my story a million times, but the one thing working with clients who have had the opportunity to work with you that I hear all the time is your passion. Like, you care so deeply about this. And I'm just curious, like, what lit that fuse? Like, what happened, or was there a moment in your experience somewhere that really sparked this in you, that made this really what you focus on every single day at this point in your career?
There was that moment, absolutely. I think from how I identify as just a person, personally and professionally, is that I love to build things. It doesn't matter what it is. No one ever starts out saying, I'm going to build a crappy product, or I'm going to build a product that doesn't have quality in it. So everything I look at is all about looking at the very small details and then zooming out and understanding how to build to that quality detail. The thing that really sort of sparked it within my career, while it's always been there, and I built a market research agency that was known for quality, the thing that really mattered and pivoted my career was getting ripped off for $250,000. It was no fun to go through that process. The study itself was basically infiltrated by fraud. And that was a bit of a moment for me to say, what do I need to do about this? Because I knew I could do something about it. If I'm that passionate about our quality output of anything, we have and had, even then, a very large issue. Now, back then it was 2013. And that there was a lot going on in that moment where the fraud wasn't as prevalent as it is today. It was sort of lurking in the shadows, but it was there, and I knew it was going to grow. Things like that don't get addressed. They just grow. They're like a vine. So that was the big issue. And facing that huge loss, yes, it was important for me to address the loss and go transparent and do the things I needed to do. But the very first statement I made was, I'm going to fix this problem. And it was a pretty big issue that I knew that was bigger than me. It was bigger than a company. And in many ways, it was going to be something that the industry was going to have to struggle with over the next decade, which is exactly where we're at now.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me, I mean, I obviously was operating from the sample perspective, the rise in technology, the absolute alteration of the experience in that ecosystem on behalf of the respondent. You know, for me, when I started working with you, and we've had so many hours of conversations at this point about your life in agencies, my life on the sample side, you know, one thing you've really helped me do is personalize the experience of the risk that fraud and data quality threats overall have to a small to mid-sized research company, right? I tended to think of this as a economic problem, as a problem that was tied to complex technology. But what you've really done for me is help me understand the personal and business impact on a whole company of that perfect project experiencing an awful problem at the worst time possible. And then the disruption that has to the stability of owners' income, the whole team's income. And so for me, that's been my biggest perspective growth. But I still always saw our parallel paths as being opposite ends of the same coin. I'm curious, like, how do you view it coming in from an agency perspective? We're so sample intensive internally. You know, what have been some of your aha moments when you've been thinking this through from the other side of the coin?
Yeah, great question. And it's one that when I knew that I wanted to make a change in this industry, being in the market research agency space, you got to figure out how far upstream you got to go. And a big part of that stream is absolutely the sample space. That you cannot get to where the fraud originates unless you go through that space. I've always wanted to take on new challenges as well. And you're absolutely right. I wanted to see what the other side of that coin looked like. The thing that I've realized in this is, and it's a real testament to you as a leader and you as a person within this space, is that the authentic approach that you have taken in building the company allowed me to, because we have that same parallel or that same platform of quality, it allowed me to step up on your platform of quality and understand what you were seeing in that process. That's the first item. The second is there is such a stark contrast between what the agencies perceive and what the sample industry is actually doing, what the sample side of the industry is actually doing. Just yesterday, someone said, can you speak to the diminishing response rates? I'm like, that's an odd question to ask, but I would have asked that same question coming out of the market research agency space just 7 years ago. And response rates weren't happening then either. So it is a testament to how different the sample side is from what the market research side thinks. That's the first. That process then turns into, well, okay, so they're different, but what does that mean? And the biggest part that, and we call it your sample world today presentation. That sample world today presentation, it seems that it gets encore presentations quite often. And it gets requested quite often because it opens the eyes to the market research agencies in a way that I've never seen. I was in this industry for 25 years before I saw that presentation, and it changed my perspective completely. It's almost as if the aperture opened up, and I was able to see the rest of the industry. So one of the things that popped out about that was the fact that they're in the programmatic space. It's a commodities program at this point. A lot of the people are selling the same respondents over and over again, and it's the same people. So the branding process has lost its way a bit. And I do think that there's a bit of a reckoning that's going to happen over the next 5 years in that space. Not bad, not good, just it's going to happen because the business models need to change. We can't continue with this approach as it is right now. They changed under the market research agency as it was, and they need to, I don't think they will change exactly back to where they were. That business model didn't work as much, but I do think that what you brought to my ability to understand this industry is a lens that I don't know that it could have been as authentic if it would have been someone else. In fact, I know if it was just someone in the sample space that was dealing with programmatic all the time, and that was the only thing they dealt with, I think they would have given me a different lens to look at. And I wouldn't have seen all the bumps and bruises of that model that you have been able to expose.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've been here along the way, but we always have this debate as each sort of growth juncture that requires us to hire more of is it better or more challenging to hire talent that's already been in the sample space, right? And I think what we've concluded is it really depends on the person, right? And their sensibility and there's a degree, you said it well in terms of expanding your aperture, but I think there's a degree of reflection that we would need people to have had in a sample company if they're going to come in and it's going to make sense here, right? So people that kind of just have served their role, not thought twice, just kind of did what they were told, they tend to have a lot of questions when we start training them in a very different way here. And then we show them our technology versus what they were used to. It's a big challenge. It's a big growth opportunity for sure for those people, but it's a big challenge. So I think that's a point well made. There is a psychographic almost affiliated with people that have gone through that programmatic sample kind of ecosystem as an employee. And then what are they gleaming from it? What are they taking from it? It's one of those things I think about a lot, but certainly for us, we found this sort of piece that, let's really not be closed or necessarily skewed toward people with that experience, but let's really evaluate what they got from it and how they think about it. And that served us really well. So one of your particular deeply valuable roles in our company is to stay on top. This is a thankless job, I'll admit it, but it's to stay on top of all the emerging fraud threats that come about. We're big believers that the fraud game is not done. It's never over. It's a constantly evolving because the bad actors are constantly tweaking and changing and experimenting, right? So we have to be constantly vigilant, and you really lead that effort for us. So I'd love to hear about, maybe one particularly gratifying win you've had over the last few years, tackling that for us.
Yeah. So, when everything happened the way it did, $250,000 loss that I had, I knew at some point I needed to really go after something bigger than that. And if you're going to have an industry impact, the first step in that is awareness. And that awareness issue is that I realized this odd thing that was happening with fraud. Nobody was personalizing it. Nobody was saying the fraudster or the survey fraudster. They weren't mentioning a person in the middle of those terms. And I was like, these are people that they live lives. And yeah, are they the criminal in the alley? Likely not the criminal in the alley. But it's important for us to expose what they look like and what they mean and not physically look like, just what do they look like? What do they do in their day? So I made we call it the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal of finding fraudsters to interview because they were like a myth. And that myth that was out there, finding someone that wants to talk about this and have the ego big enough to disregard what they are talking about in an illegal sense is a difficult one. So I was able to do it with two people. Those who haven't seen those fraudster interviews and listening to this podcast, please, it's a really cool thing to watch because it's a bit of a 60 minutes moment in terms of what they bring forward. It does change your perspective when you hear the fraudster talking about this. And it does change your perspective when you see the steps they take to manipulate and misrepresent themselves in the way that they do. So that was the big moment for me. There's other big moments that have happened since, but that one is the one that I think turned the corner and allowed me to start seeing the industry in a way that the way they responded, there's certain people that didn't respond too well. There's others that loved it and gushed over what it brought to the table. So that was likely the largest moment.
And for me, I think how people receive that was very telling, right? There's a wide spectrum of people's awareness or understanding. So you'll see people that, wow, this is really validating what I thought, and others where their foundation gets shaken a little, particularly after just watching that 15-minute video, which was a small synopsis of your big SMR presentation. But yeah, from that standpoint, I think it was an eye-opening moment in an uncomfortable way. And one thing I like to say to people is like, look, even that was just a few short years ago, but we're in a totally different place now to be able to have the tools and the methods and the understanding to be able to effectively protect surveys. And that's been a change, I think, that we talk about pretty openly, that we went from being, oh man, how are we going to tackle this, to no, we're doing a really solid job, and that's validated by the researchers in our industry across a variety of industries. So yeah, that felt really good to me. So we talked about fraud prevention. We talked about your journey in data quality overall. You've been participating quite a bit with the Insights Association over the last couple of years, both as a mentor and a board member on a local chapter, but also on some of the leading data quality initiatives that the industry associations are trying to really rally us all around a common cause. I would love to just hear a little bit from you about what your participation in these initiatives has really meant for you, meant for the improvement of the industry overall.
So when everything went down back in my first aha moment, I wasn't too crazy about what the industry associations were doing at that point. They weren't effective at that point, and it wasn't the Insights Association of today. It was CTrO and MRA, and they just weren't activation. The activating portion to what they did was just not there. We were seeing them in conferences, but that was about it. I think there's been a real shift in the perception of what they do and what their goals are, and I really do attest that to the leadership that's in the Insights Association at this point. The thing that I realized very early on is that it's not like I'm going to fix just my single person. I'm not going to fix fraud in this industry. I'm going to need the team, the perspective, the understanding of folks like you to allow for that to happen. And then in a wider scope, we need an association to help bring a lot of this forward and really support the idea. What they also bring forward is a lot of a good example of that is what we do with some of the secure survey links, right? So when you're doing something right and you look over and you see in parallel the same thing happening in an association or talking about that thing, you know that it's a pretty good idea that you keep doing that thing. And that's exactly what's going on with the secure survey links, to the point that we've got this solved on our side. If you're inside of our world, you know that you're not going to have to deal with link jumping. You're not going to have to deal with those sort of things because our platform takes care of that. But for us to then go to an industry-wide conference, and the very first thing that the CEO of the Insights Association says as she is on stage for the first time is, remember your secure survey links. It changes the paradigm when someone and a whole association is saying it to that level, right? And saying it to the whole association. Associations take leading edge technology and they're able to make it a standard. They're able to move it forward because that's their remit. Inform, communicate, bring those things forward. And that's exactly what the Insights Association has been able to do. I think one of the more important things that they've also done, which has gained a serious amount of momentum and respect on my part, is how they've collaborated with the other associations in the world with the Global Data Quality Initiative. If you're listening to this podcast, go to globaldataquality.org and you'll see everything about it. There's 9 different associations that have signed up for this, and they all are doing different things to then all come together as one about this. Everything from a glossary to ways to understand things like the Respondent Bill of Rights. There's just quite a bit that they're doing to increase quality. And that doesn't happen overnight. Like, we can't have immediate gratification on this stuff. And that's the thing that people have to keep in mind. This is a long play. And for them to do that means so much. There's one point that I do want to mention outside of data quality, and it's one of the main reasons I got involved. When I got into this industry, I didn't have anyone welcoming me in. In fact, everyone around me were accidental in terms of them being in the industry. And I felt that was something that this industry has always not done a great job of. There's no welcome mat anywhere. So this year, after being the president of the chapter, I am now the director of new professionals. And what that really means is that I want to roll out the welcome mat. There's things for mentoring programs. There's guest speaking in classrooms. Last year, we exposed the Insights Association to about 150 students in our chapter. And this year, we're going for 300 in our chapter. So they just need to know about us. That's one of the things that's different about this process. And by having folks like me who care about the industry as much as I do, I've been in it this long, I don't see me moving to any other industry. I want to make sure that I leave the industry better than it was when I got here. And that's not only about data quality, but it's also about bringing out that welcome mat and allowing new professionals that are contemplating what industry to go into. This is a really cool industry to be in. You've just got to, the new professionals have to see it before they can decide to go to it.
Yeah. I'm thinking back to the 90s when I started in the industry. I will say the Market Research Association, which became the Insights Association, my first conference, probably my first year in the career. I do have to give a shout out to Harriet Nadis, who completely took me under her wing and was so great to me and made me feel for that whole conference like I was welcome, that I had a future in the space. That was a pretty wonderful moment for me. So yeah, kudos to you on the mentorship side. I think as an industry, we could, benefit from taking some time to attract the next generation of talent. One of the reasons I believe, and I'll transition to one more question here before we wrap up, but I always believed this was a relationship, a people business. And we're kind of at an interesting juncture right now where I get asked almost every single day about AI and things like synthetic data. I'm just curious, could a people industry such as ours, adapt or evolve into that sort of approach? And I'm just curious, what role you see AI playing in conjunction with where we are today, which is a pretty mature, healthy, vibrant industry.
See, I think if we were to flip that coin over, like we do, this industry is an absolute sponge waiting to be saturated with AI. It is a people industry, but one of the things that AI isn't is a person. And we need to understand that this is an instrument. It's a tool set, just like an aggregation engine or a survey engine. It's a tool set for us to use. Is it going to pivot and change our industry? Is it going to evolve? Of course it's going to evolve. There's no way it can't. We all had some anxiety when we went online. We all had some anxiety when we started doing things a little differently, putting video online for people to look at. Each one of these steps where we evolve with the world makes a pretty big difference. If we're going to get insights from a representation of an audience, we need to make sure that the process does not feel outdated. Now, synthetic data and some of the things that are popping out right now, we may look back on that and say, yeah, that is sort of the evolutionary process to understand how to accept something like this into our world. It's much the same that happened with the internet in general. Like you look at when the internet came about, people weren't sure how to use it, right? It was sort of topical and they started putting their thoughts there, but very quickly commerce made it. Same thing's going to happen with AI. It's going to saturate and be part of our world, and we're going to find that it's not a threat, that it's an actual, gives us the capabilities that we didn't have before. And just the same as the insights industry and the sample industry, and I opened up my aperture there, same thing's going to happen here. There's just going to be a zooming out effect to where we can understand how to use it for research, for market research. We're not there yet. I think there's some bleeding edge and leading edge applications that are there right now, and those have to be tested. We like to test things every which way possible, and that's the way this industry is going to accept things in, is that we're going to validate it, make sure it's good for our clients, and then move it in.
Yeah, obviously, I totally agree with that. It's exciting, but at the same time, there is still some things to be figured out. All right, Rich, last question. Wrap up every podcast this way. You know what's coming, but what do you love most about your job?
I think this question took me the longest because it really gets, and sometimes, as you know, I will overthink things, but it's a bit like saying, what do you love most about breathing? This is very much what I've always known, and it's not because I want to change or I don't want to change. I have, through my career, done exactly what I was passionate about at that moment. There's a point in your career where you start collecting those into a combination of things that allow you, hopefully, to find a company where you can use all of them. And I think that is what I love about my job here, is that I am able to help market research agencies run their operations better. I learned how to do that through running a market research agency. I learned around the technology areas. We built software in this process. I'm super enthused about where we're going with Navigator. It's just an amazing product and platform, and it is going to evolve the industry. It's just going to take a little bit more time than your normal piece of software that someone brings in for one thing that they want to do. My contribution to this industry is one of the main reasons why I love this job. One of the things I always say is that I found someone to sponsor my passion. And I don't think that I would love my job quite the way I do now if I didn't have someone like you as a partner in this process. There's a reason why this company has the culture it does, and you've set that tone. So a lot of it is a testament to you and how much I do love my job. A lot of it is because if I sort of write down all my skill sets, I'm using every one of those every day. So when I wake up, I'm really thinking, what do I get to do today, as opposed to what do I have to do today? And there's a big, big difference in those two perspectives. So not a lot of people can say that they love their job as much as I do. And I'm really grateful for that idea and that concept. And I think every day about how I got really lucky to find OpinionRoute. I do think, though, with OpinionRoute and everything around what the company is about, is that luck it's not just luck, it's 90% effort. And we are going to get really lucky because we're putting a massive amount of effort in everything that we're doing. I can't wait to see what's around the corner. And that's what makes this such an amazing place to work.
Well, we're grateful you're doing it here with us. And thanks, Rich. This has been great.
Thank you.